Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is Matt Orozco once again from Macabre Daily, and I am so excited today to be joined by Kathryn Corcoran, who is an actor, host of the Scream Dreams podcast, who many horror fans will likely know from her role as Dawn in the Terrifier films, but also extensive work in the genre, working with studios like Troma and even in music videos for genre favorites in the music scene, Ice Nine Kills. But Catherine, you're here in support of an upcoming Shout TV series titled Double Take, which is going to
Oh,
put celebrity guests alongside curated double theme features on March 21st. So, first and foremost, congratulations on this opportunity. And what can folks expect with the Double Take series coming this March?
thanks. I mean, I'm just so privileged to that people like Emily and Brian at Shout want to even work with me at all and care about what my thoughts are in cinema at all. Um, but the Double Take series is like a rotating series where different people in film and celebrity guests turn in to curate a double feature series for Shout TV through with selections from their library. So we each pick two films from Shout around a specific theme or not. And, we have different discussions throughout the film, facts about the film, trivia, and just kind of comment through it. And I am really privileged to be their, first one up on this. And it's also, at least my programming is for Women's History Month. And I'm sure in horror we know so well the importance of women in cinema, but that's not
Yes.
necessarily the case in other aspects of creativity and in genre, at least not to the way we champion women in horror. So I'm really excited to kind of be able to use the knowledge we have as horror cinephiles into a slightly adjacent part of cinema and celebrate the women who've defined it.
It's amazing. And I recently read your Fangoria op-ed where you talked a little bit about horror has always been a political thing and reflects our current climate of events. How do you think the horror landscape is evolving in this current kind of socioeconomic time we're in?
Oh gosh, that's such an interesting question. I think you see, obviously, horror, like you said, is kind of a mirror to the world. It holds up exactly what is happening as a reflection, all the chaos and fear and stress and ugly things sometimes that are happening in the world. It's a really beautiful mirror for that. And I've noticed you see these kind of themes happen um, s- uh, sociopolitically in what's popular in genre, based on what's happening. So, like you during the Iraq War and the War on Terror, you saw this big influx in kind of like slashers, which were now deemed like the like torture porn
Right.
genre, which I don't know if that I really love that term, but the reason for films like that, like the Saw franchise and Hostel, was like that was very much a direct reflection to like and the filmmakers have said this to things that were happening in Guantanamo Bay and the idea of like American kind of like superiority. So you saw this like huge influx in things like that. And then as we get into like, at least from my perspective, modern fears of like being trapped with your own thoughts and like sociopolitical things, you see like an influx of more like psychological driven horror, like
Right.
Get Out and Nope, you know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
and that reflect like racial tensions and this kind of like idea of being trapped, and which makes perfect sense because that's something that we're actively dealing with that. And now, we're entering this again era of like fearing for survival, the idea that one could be taken from their home, that their body is now no longer theirs.
Okay.
These are like real socio-political questions that are happening. You're seeing like economic strain. So I certainly think it makes sense while we're seeing, being part of the Terrifier franchise. I see it in general, like this influx of like the slasher like genre, like because it touches on those themes. But I think I'd be curious, like if we start to see like an influx of maybe zombie films,
Ooh,
post-apocalyptic style films. I mean, we're seeing in like, HBO, this idea of like post-apocalyptic narratives kind of coming up. So right after 9/11, we also saw that. Um, this influx of zombie films because this idea that like and like early 2000s Y2K like idea that this was like the end of the world. So, and also in like the 60s and 70s. So I'm curious. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but it would be kind of I think we might see that kind of influx. And I also think you're gonna see an influx in iconic female kind of warrior characters, which I know Mike Flanagan is working on a Carrie reboot, like a
yep.
series of that. There's been like talks about finally the Buffy the Vampire Slayer reboot. And I think that makes sense as well at a time when women and queer people are very fearful for their body autonomy. You're going to see these kind of like warrior women like characters come forward as a kind of, because that's something we identify and need. So I don't know. These are just
Yeah,
like loose predictions. I don't, things could change at any day as
that's
2025
true.
has taught us already. And that will certainly change the entertainment space is very fickle like that as well. But yeah, those are my like loose predictions of what you'll see in horror.
I love it. And I tend to agree that, not only is it a reflection of what's happening, but it also tends to kind of exacerbate our already existing fears and kind of turn them into something far more visceral in the form of a horror
Yeah.
film. And speaking on, the topic that you're doing your episode on around women in film and particularly genre film, how you've been in the industry for some time. So I'm curious kind of your experience as a female in the industry. What have you seen change? Where have there been positive gains, and then where do we still have some work to do?
Oh gosh. Well, I was a child actor, so I did like off-Broadway tours as a kid and then moved into cinema and film and TV as I got a little older. And Nuke 'Em High, which is a trauma film, Return to Nuke 'Em High, that was my first lead in a feature, and it was also, a genre film. And it just so happened that it was a horror comedy that happened to get into the Cannes Film Festival and which was wild and kind of launched my like trajectory there. And the thing that was so interesting about that was a queer film at a time when gay marriage wasn't legal, and that same year at Cannes, Blue was I don't know if you can hear that. I apologize. There's like construction happening. Okay.
No.
Okay, good. So at the same time, blue is the warmest color was what had won the Palme d'Or. And so I and at the I remember having conversations at that time about what it meant to take on something like this and to do intimate scenes of a queer nature. And it was considered incredibly controversial, which is wild to think about because it was like
I
maybe
know.
only 10 years ago. But my agents dropped me at that time because they couldn't, I
Wow.
was a kid actor, so they couldn't put me up for like Disney and Nickelodeon anymore. Like things that to do that now would be insane, because
Yeah.
someone is portraying a queer character and there happens to be like a love scene there. But that was very much part of the culture. So I've seen that change and improve. I also started and was doing some kind of like controversial stuff pre-me, not really controversial, but in my opinion, but edgier things pre-Me Too, you know? And
Yeah.
that was definitely like a thing I've seen evolve in a big way. Um, I don't know. I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of like how we portray women on screen, how we portray sexuality on screen, queer sexuality. I also think we have a long way to go in terms of like making these spaces feel safe. The idea of an
Mm.
intimacy coordinator is still kind of like a case by case basis. And I'd like to see that not be even a thing that you put on the actor. Like, oh, do you want that? So they can feel like some sort of pressure or like privilege for not doing it or doing it, just like let's just have it in the same way we have
Yeah,
a
just have it as a
supervisor.
default.
Yeah, I don't really, that's like a conversation I don't really quite understand. You know, big and I think some people feel like it like adds a level of awkwardness. And if that's the case, like on the day, be like, I don't need this, but at least you have someone there, stuff like
Yeah.
that I would like. I don't know. So that's stuff I'd like to see improve. I'd also like to see I'd like to see like financial equity the same for I'd like to see that improve across the board for all departments.
Yeah.
It's really we just struck about this and we have a long way to go. I think, it's very hard. Films are not being made for the same budgets they used to be made for. The idea of a $6 million picture, which was Anora, which won the Academy Award, is like a huge budget now for an indie,
Right.
which is insane. That's insane because there was a time when like $8 to $12 million features were kind of like that's where people like cut their teeth. You got
Yeah, like
films
the
like
80s and 90s was,
yeah,
5 to 10 million dollars.
that's where you got films like The Craft. That's where you got films like Lost Boys. All of those kind of existed in that budget that helped define people's career and also made really great movies. So the idea that we're like scrounging to make these like films for under $500,000, I just think that we need to invest more in our
Yeah.
teams because it creates like a larger so many other issues, not just in the ability to profit, but in like things that have to get cut in terms of like quality, safety, all of that stuff, I think, needs to be improved upon. And I know there's larger conversations about that, about streaming not being profitable enough
Right.
to allow for that. But then we need to figure out a way that it can be, whether that's like a pay-per-view cable model, whether that's getting people back to the movie theaters, whether that's more physical media. You know, Technology is not something we struggle with as a society. We're shelling out things all the time. So I think we can figure it out, you know?
I would agree with you, and I think you're spot on that, we're all there seems to be an unequal ask of filmmakers depending on who they are, where they are, what they're creating,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Netflix can blow $300 million in a movie that performs, not so great. So it's like, where's that money going is the question. And, particularly as we think about the role that the film community and the horror community particularly can play here. Obviously, our dollars can showing up with our funds to pay for tickets and things like that is always a good way of showing where our allegiances lie. But is there anything else that you think the horror community can do at large to help support women, queer, and just marginalized filmmakers in the genre?
Gosh, well, I mean, the horror community is actually really amazing because they're big curators of physical collectors of physical media. That's so
Yep.
huge. That was I know, right? And Shout TV is not only does Shout like have this streaming platform, but they are primarily a physical media outlet. So that's like a huge thing. I think just in doing that, not only do you allow for ways to support these films and these filmmakers and make them profitable, because the only way we get to make more is if they're profitable. So like
Right.
that's a huge part of it. But the other thing that like I've been talking about this today, is that you understand the process so much more when you purchase physical media because of the bonus programming that's on it and the idea of like special features and commentary tracks and things like that. It educates you on how to make movies, and I think that's a whole thing that I worry a whole generation of filmmakers will lose.
Yeah.
Because we've all had those stories about growing up and understanding, like knowing what the movie was that we watched, where we watched the behind the scenes track, and whether it was some weird zombie prosthetic bonus feature that you understood, or like a model making thing, or just some crazy effects shot, or maybe it was just like what they put into a performance. You then were like, I want to be a filmmaker. That is lost,
Right.
and I think it's so important that we have that, because if we don't, there's going to be a whole generation of people who maybe don't want to make movies, and if they do, won't have those understandings, and that's so
Yeah.
important. It's so important to
Yeah.
understand how things are done and be able to expand on it.
I never thought about, I mean, as a big proponent of physical media, this is one of three shelves in here that are
That's
filled.
amazing.
Um, but I do agree that I never thought that I never considered what someone who's a younger film fan today would have as a resource aside from physical media. Sure,
Yeah,
YouTube can maybe teach you how to use an editing tool, but it's not going to tell you how to experiment in a way that maybe will help you find your voice and vision as a
yeah.
filmmaker. And I know we're talking a little bit about double features here, so I had to squeeze this one in here. But if you had to pick your dream double feature, horror or not, but dream double
Oh
feature,
my
what two movies
God.
would you pick?
Oh my God. That is so hard. Oh,
I know your brain's
I
probably thinking of every movie you've ever seen right now, and that's coming in a big wave, and you're like, what do I pick?
yeah, gosh. I'd say, well, there's two. Okay, I'm gonna give you a handful that I like that are like, so I would do The Shining and then Doctor Sleep. I think
Classic.
that's like a really great, and they're two very different films, but like they're the same universe and storyline. That's really cool. In the same way that I always tell people if you're gonna watch Return to Nuke 'Em High Volume 1, watch Return to the original class of Nuke 'Em High. I'd say I'm I'm such a Lord of the Rings nerd that, but like you can't stop at the two towers. Like, what
No.
is that? And you can't skip to like
Yeah,
what
can't
is
sip
that?
Fellowship.
Like it's just like what are we even talking about? So, and I wouldn't say, I'm sorry, I wouldn't say like do a Hobbit film in, it doesn't work. Although there's an animated,
There
um,
is.
there's two animated, there's an animated Lord of the Rings like series
Ralph
that,
Bashki, I think it is, old one.
yeah,
Yeah.
like the first one is really dark and really heavy, and the second one's a full-on musical, and that's like a really like amazing back-to-back thing. So I would say that, and then I don't, oh gosh. I'd say also maybe watch the original It and then watch It Chapter One. Like, because that's just a cinematic masterpiece. And like, I feel like those back, I don't know. So maybe that's a few. The other thing I'd say, if you like 80s, 90s horrors, I'd say watch the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer and then watch
Oh, so good.
or like The Lost Boys and The Craft are really good. And then this is not horror, but like The Craft and Empire Records are really good together. You know what I
I
mean?
can hear that soundtrack in my head right
Right?
now
Because that's exactly why. It's just the soundtrack, you know?
well, Catherine, this has
But,
been amazing. I just want to say thank you so much for your time, and just remind everyone that watching this that they can catch your episode of Double Takes premiering on the 21st on Shout TV.
yeah.
So please, everyone, go check that out. And again, Catherine, looking forward to your continued success both in film and the podcasting world and everywhere else you pop up. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate you.